Welcome to selfdiscoverymedia.com, where the orchard of wisdom shows are at your fingertips. It ignites your soul, your heart, your spirit, your mind, and your body with illumination from people who have made the journey before you. They're here now to help you on your journey, on your path of self-discovery. We are funded by you, the audience, and the people we interview. If you wish to support us, please go to selfdiscoverymedia.com and press on our Fund Action button. Anything is appreciated. We'd like you to sit back and enjoy the shows. Here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of An Author's Kiss right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. I'm your host, Sarah Troy, and my wonderful repeat guest is Charles Sheldon. He was here last year where we talked about the ancient wisdom and also all the wonderful books that he's written. Strong Heart, Adrift, Totem, and we went through the books, which we're actually going to touch on again today, but we're actually going to be talking a little bit more, and I please invite you to go back and listen to our previous conversation because this is part 2. But we're going to be talking about themes in the tales concerning power and truth of the ancient legend, as well as the notion that people from long, long ago somehow had less wisdom or insight than we do today. There seems to be a widely held view that humans before writing were somehow less sophisticated than we really are. I think we definitely do differ on that. We don't think that, do we, Charles? Right?
I don't think that. I don't think that. Of course, the irony in all this is that none of us really knows because we don't have direct memory and we only have limited sources. So it's sort of what you choose to believe and the evidence that you can muster to support that belief
Mm.
in a way.
Before documentation, there used to be documentation in art form, right? Carvings on the cave walls and
Right.
storytelling passed down around the campfires, etc., and the tales that would be passed on. And of course, with every tale told, somebody else will put their own interpretation in it and pass that on. So a lot of the wisdom could either increase or be diluted. But I think in many, many, many ways, people of the ancient times were perhaps a great deal wiser, maybe not as knowledgeable, but wiser than we are today because they trusted their instincts so much and they learned how to read the signs of the universe on earth and they were more in tuned, where we're more reliant on book knowledge or teachings as we are into our own attunement.
I think you're right. Here's an interesting statistic or fact, which is that ancient modern humans, say 100,000, 200,000, or 300,000 years ago, or even pre agriculture, seemed to be people with larger brains than the brains we have today. Not much larger, but larger. And that's an interesting. And the question then is, well, why would the brain be getting smaller if it is getting smaller? And I think one theory might be that as in the old days, before there was writing and ways to store information in a book or in the cloud, I mean, you can look at it either way. The only way people could gather information and store it and pass it generation to generation was through the telling of stories,
Mhm.
through the telling of myths. And apparently, it was quite common for these people to memorize hours and hours and hours of
Yes.
stories about ancestry that went back hundreds of generations. And maybe all that extra brain size was needed to carry all that information in the brain because there was no other place to put it. And nowadays, first we did writing,
Mm-hmm.
which enables storage of some information. Now we have the computer and the cloud, and you know, it makes you kind of wonder if all you have to do is click on your phone to get any answer you want.
Yes.
your brain might shrink because you don't need to remember it. It's
You're
basically
not using
somewhere
it.
else.
You know, like I've just bought a 4 terabyte hard drive
Oh
and I've
man.
already got 2 terabyte hard drives of, almost full. Obviously, I
Right,
back up all the shows and
right,
everything, but
right,
I think you're right that we're so reliant on storing the information elsewhere, right? Where we just at a click, we can retrieve it, that maybe we're not
right.
using that part of the memory brain that used to store all the information.
Well, I think the other thing, of course, is that they're different. It used to be in the 19th century, in the first of anthropology and, you know, exploring strange cultures. The idea was that the hunter-gatherer tribes that were encountered were very primitive and not fully human. I mean, there was a lot of racism in
Mhm.
the beliefs, and that was the view for decades. And lately, the people have started to realize that no, that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of sophistication in some of these cultures. And now there was a book written not so long ago called the Origin of Every. I can't remember the title of the book, but it was a different thesis about ancient humans, arguing that there were, you know, people chose to live in very different ways before agriculture and technology, and some of those ways were less violent. And I actually, it's an interesting thesis. It got a lot of um, favorable coverage. I ordered the book and read it, and I was very disappointed because it seemed to me like 35 million words about really nothing that was really different, but kind of hopeful, thinking that maybe there was an, you know, this Eden-like idyllic past where everyone was equal and everyone was
Mm.
thoughtful and women were treated well. And I'd love to agree with that, but I got to tell you, I don't think that's the way it was. I think we've been pretty rough all the way. But I think that basic wisdom, I don't think I don't think that the idea that people are wiser today makes sense, especially if our
Mm.
brains are smaller,
Right,
you
exactly.
know? And
Yeah.
so it's just and of course, a lot of this ancient wisdom, as well as languages and everything else, have been lost forever,
Mm.
lost, they're gone. And we just don't know. And so the past is a dim haze to all of us. And much as we try to refine it and have it make a point and argue this idea that we're moving along toward ever more sophistication and ever more development, I think it's no question we're moving toward ever more development. Sophistication, I don't know. I mean, I think
Debatable.
people in cultures might look at us and say, wait a minute, you're cutting all your trees down. What are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. One thing, so many people today that I've interviewed have become channelers of knowledge, conduits. They've said suddenly that just they opened up unwillingly, well, willingly because you have to have the will, but just unknowingly. And the next thing they have a book in front of them that they can't remember writing, or they don't know what they were writing, but it was wisdom from the past. And I think, again, going back to that intuitiveness where people understood the land, they knew how to look at the weather. In your book Adrift, you're talking about a boat, a ship going down and being adrift, and in on the weather. You had to have some knowledge of the sea and the wind to know how it worked, to know what your survival would be, because there was no access to a computer or anything else at that
Right,
time to tell you, right? So
right,
our instincts are just so utterly profound, but I think we're dumbing them down by allowing. I mean, yes, it's wonderful to be able to have, Google, tell us this, tell us that. Yes, it's wonderful to have that kind of access, but not in place of our own intuitiveness of understanding that may be a fact, but how does it relate to me and what does it mean? What can I do with it? Do my instincts agree, or what does it trigger in my instincts to do? I feel in many, many ways, the more information we have access to, the dumber we are becoming, because we're losing the art of being integrative with the wisdom, with the knowledge, what to do with it. You know, I would say the head is like a computer, it's full of data. But if you don't have the heart and soul and the spirit's wisdom to know how to use the data, that's all it is. There's a bunch of knowledge that we don't know what to do with. And I think if we've lost that art of that connection, then we have become rather just mindless computers without knowing how to use it wisely.
I agree with that. I think, of course, when you have a highly intense, developed society with cities and utilities and infrastructure and electricity, you know, there's lots of many people are very far removed from a lot of the natural cycles that people evolved with, right? And so that may be causing a bit of it, you know, just this sort of, you're isolated from it. And then I think the other thing that's both the blessing and the curse is you can learn a lot by watching the screen, but you can also have the screen just entertain you without thinking. And if you don't, your mind's a muscle too. If you don't exercise the mind, then it's going to get flabby and not work very well.
And shrink.
As well, I think, and shrink. And so I'm thinking that, I actually think that in ancient times, when there were far fewer people, I mean, my thesis is that before the end of the Ice Age and for all those hundreds of thousands of years before that, humans were not the apex predator. There were big animals that were the apex predator, and humans were oftentimes nearly wiped out and struggled to survive. And those that did survive, you know, had to be pretty strong and so on. And so I think what you might have had was a situation with far fewer humans. Many of them were killed, many of them died, many of them, I mean, entire groups were wiped out again and again and again. And they had to develop a lot of skills that we don't need to use today because we don't have the big animals and stuff to worry about.
Well, we've become the predators.
Well, we become the apex predator and the most dangerous.
Yes, a species of all times. Yes,
right?
Most certainly.
But I don't think, you know, the idea that there was an ancient society where it was all love and roses, I think is also, I think, you know, life is difficult. You know, there were a lot of people lost in childbirth back then. But if you lived through childbirth, you could live to a very great age. I mean, that I don't think it was true that everybody only lived to 40. I think they lived to a great age if they could get through their childhood.
It's also the childhood diseases, you know, like my mum had scarlet fever, you know, the things like chickenpox and measles. I know with my own kids, not so long ago, 30 odd years ago, somebody had measles, you just had them all play together, you know, and now there's inoculation against it. And it's like, you know, have everybody get it to build up the immune system, and that's done. Right? Make sure you're not around a pregnant woman. That was the only stipulation, you know.
You know, that brings to mind a thought that I don't see people mentioning, which is this, that it may very well be that in the last, say, 50 years, with all these inoculations and with the much more hygienic kind of way of living, the fact that kids are no longer out there eating dirt and playing in the dirt, and they aren't building up the kind of immunities that they need, which may make people more vulnerable to a lot of things that they didn't used to be vulnerable to.
I mean, the common cold seems to be, you know, exponential, where, you know, when you look back on history, you know, it wasn't something that, oh, you're inevitably going to get several colds this winter. No, you know, because as you said, they built up that immunity, and that dirt kept them warm too. They were more hardy. Right, more hearty. And you know, going back to the wisdom, and I think, you know, going back to your book Adrift, you know, a ship going down, being adrift out the sea, having to know the wind, having to know the weather, hoping that somebody had got the message to come and rescue you, and everybody had to step into their survival. You know, in the book you have some people had their their particular outfits on that could keep them warm against hypothermia, and others didn't manage to get it, so they're switching around trying to keep everybody warm. You've got people puking, you've got people peeing, you've got people doing everything that in the movies. It always marvels me in the movies that nobody ever goes to the toilet. These heroes go from one thing to the other and they never seem to need a bathroom, or to eat. It's just like they're just super people, which is an illusional thing. But, I think one of the things is you had the farmer that knew his land. You had the shepherd that knew the sheep and the weather. You had the seaman that knew the waters. You had people that knew their arena. And when they brought that information together, then you had an abundance of information of everybody sharing it, right? Whereas today, we expect people to know everything, which is not. Everybody has a gift. Everybody has a forte that they're good at, that's what they're meant to be, that's their contribution. And this thing is that you've got to be a bit of everything. I disagree with,
Yeah, I agree with that. Can we pause for 1 minute?
Yes. So do you think that everybody trying to be the one size fits all is kind of where the problem is that we're not actually tapping into the particular knowingness that we're all intricately have on something, and then also that inability to share it?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's a very complicated world we're in today, and it's, I mean, you were talking about how people knew their, you weren't saying this, but what you, in a way you could say, people in the old days, people knew their place in the sense, not only their place on the land or on the sea, but their place in society. It was, you were the king or you were a serf. I mean, it was
you had a role to play.
You had a role to play, and people accepted the role, and their sphere of knowledge wasn't very broad. Now it's very, very different. I remember seeing a show I watched a video of this person who chose to live up in northern Greenland, and they were interviewing this person, and there was a devastating statement was made, which was that with this development of social media and Facebook and these little phones, all the kids up in northern Greenland who previously only knew the life they were born to, or maybe some visitors from outside now and then, now every day they can see the way people live everywhere else on earth, and they feel that they're missing it.
Yeah.
They feel they're lacking. Yeah. They get depressed, and they flee home, or they can't handle it and they take their own lives. So in a way, the one of the issues seems to be that people's expectations are fed by this commercial culture and everything, and they raise the expectations, and of course you can only do so many things, right? You only have so many days. You can only do so many things. But if you want to do something that you just can't get around to doing, you're going to get angry and frustrated, and it's, anyway, it's all this in my mind. The thing that's striking me about this is that if you read the ancient philosophers who talk about questions like what is truth and what is survival, and we think that, well, we're way beyond that, but we're not way beyond that. We're dealing with the same questions today. It's just it's in the ancient times, the truth was what's happening. The sea level keeps rising 3 feet a year because the ice is melting when the ice age ended. Now the question is, it's sort of is the same thing, maybe for different reasons, but people, we've had, in my opinion, we've had to deal with these cosmic, life-threatening issues right from the beginning of our evolution.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been long periods where we've lived a settled, nice life, maybe, when the weather's been really good between ice ages. We have long periods of nice weather. But most of the time, the weather is not good. And we've had to live with that. And so it's been one upset after another. And I think the terrible illusion that we've become trapped with is this idea that somehow through our technological progress, we've gone beyond the fact that we have these kind of biblical crises facing us. But we kind of do. I mean, can go back in history and
Yes.
find weather catastrophes again and again and again, maybe not caused by humans driving automobiles, but there's still weather catastrophes and they're still equally damaging. So I think it's a shock today for us this Omicron thing and this whole virus thing is a real ego deflator because we can't seem to handle it.
And it doesn't matter who you are. It's a level playing field, right? You know, oh, I'm rich and popular. He doesn't care. Omnicom doesn't care, you know.
Well, there was a little snippet in news the other day about another variant that's appeared somewhere that's got even more than Omicron in terms of differences. And I didn't read anything more, but here we are, we're fighting Omicron like we were fighting Delta. What if another one shows up?
Well, what seems to be the pattern from the coronavirus, this is the fifth one. Each one of them becomes more ferocious, but less dangerous. So the Omicron is like a really bad flu. And if you've been vaccinated, it's just the flu. And various people, my family have gone through it this Christmas. Right. They've all had various levels of it, from just aches and pains to literally the sore throats and not able to speak and the shivers and aches and pains, which is like a very bad flu. But the Delta and the Corona and the one that was in between, which I can't remember the name of, hospitalized people. Omnicom hasn't really hospitalized people and hasn't been kind of the deaths. It's just been a very bad flu for those who've been vaccinated. Those that haven't been vaccinated, they say it's more the Delta that is getting them. So even if there's another one to come up, and they say Omnicom in 2 months will burn itself out, will see itself through.
Right.
And so if another one comes up, it might be just as ferocious, but a shorter period of time. And everything has its height and everything has its decline. And if we look at the pandemics and if we look at floods, if we look at disasters, it has a peak and then it comes back down to a level, and then it's out of the ashes, what do we build? And I think that the virus itself has been one of an invitation to humanity of, again, it doesn't matter who you are. So you could be the richest person in the world. That doesn't make you any more important than the poorest person in the world. If it's going to get you, it's going to get you. And I also think it's reminded us of the people that really, on a daily basis, keep us alive. Our truckers with the goods, our farmers, our nurses, our doctors, the shop workers. Without them, where we've been, it's not the Fortune 500 CEOs, right? They just lock themselves up in their little towers. So we've seen who are really the heroes. And I think it's also been a great invitation for us to reflect on our own lives of what really is important. But we're still very slow to learn. I think human beings, out of all of the species ever gone before, can be the thickest because we're so slow to learn of what really is important.
And we have to keep relearning, I think, a lot
we
of these
do.
lessons. And I think that the other thing when I was a kid, the people who were the adults had all grown up in a depression, and they remembered the time of scarcity and fear and saving things. And so it was a very much more conservative mindset in terms of, keep what you got, take care of what you got, don't mess, That's changed now to, it's as generations go and we forget that. We naturally, and we have all these technological tools to have an abundant, rich, I don't mean wealthy, but rich in terms of material goods life, so that everybody's got a cell phone, everybody, it's all this stuff. And yet the same difficulties about despair of the soul and what is meaning and what is truth. I mean, one thing I think we're learning, which is a little shocking, it's certainly shocking to me, and it makes you wonder what history really would say, if you could really go back, is it does appear that as whole groups of people can collectively go kind of mad with different belief structures, and just
Yes.
decide that, okay, the earth's flat, and and they believe it, and you can't convince them otherwise.
No.
They'll even die before you convince them otherwise.
Right.
And that's a little bit terrifying, and it's very scary to see it happening today when we supposedly have all this information.
Well, it seems to be that we have so much science today. People have dedicated their lives into studying, whatever science it is, medical, physical, whatever it is. Yet there seems to be a pushback against the science. And, the more you say this is it, the more other people go, no, it's fake news. I wonder where that started. But, there's a pushback against the knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, apparently there was a period there was a party in America before the Civil War called the Know Nothing Party, and they were proud in what they didn't know. It was an anti-elitist group of folks who decided that, there's another way. And this is not a new thing in this country. I don't know what in Canada, but in this country, there's been this sort of celebration of you don't need to know everything, and so these things seem to repeat in my mind in some way. And yeah, we have the situation in this country now where you have lots of people. Somehow the whole issue about a vaccination reduces your chances of getting severely hurt by this thing has been politicized.
Yes.
To mean that, by proudly saying you won't get vaccinated, even at the risk of your life,
right,
that's more important. That identity is more important than, this idea about the collective benefit. I mean, you're right. I mean, I'm just saying a long way what you're saying, that people are losing. But I think part of the reason that people are losing some faith in science is there have been a lot of cases of bad science or dishonest science or
mad
fake
science
papers. Yeah, I mean, things that are done wrong, and so people are suspicious, and there's
and where there's suspicion, there could be hysteria.
Yeah, exactly, and so everyone's hoping. I think people are hoping that people come to their senses and settle down and just try to do the best they can. But of course, you can make another argument, which is that we get our news from commercially supported platforms, and they're in business to make money, and they make money by getting eyeballs on their screen, buying the stuff they advertise.
Right.
And even the so-called alternative news, like in the States, there's a bunch of YouTube-based channels that are pretty highly regarded, but they're all having to hustle for money and support and sponsors now. And so my memory is, and I could be really wrong about this, but my memory is that the local news was a requirement for a company to have use of a federally owned airwave. They had to provide so much local news every day, local and national. And it was a cost center for them. They had to do it. It wasn't entertainment. It wasn't,
neutral. It was neutral, was it? Yes.
Yeah. And Walter Cronkite would read the news.
Yes.
He wouldn't pontificate on what you should think about it. He'd read it and you'd make your own mind up. But that changed, and for whatever reason that changed. And so now, if you listen to, well, you're either in one silo or another silo, and they're different silos too. And So if I were going to be cynical, and some days I feel cynical, I'd say that people are very, very bad at taking preventive action to prevent problems that are far out in the future.
I
It's
agree.
very, very hard to give up something you have for something that might or might not happen. And so
Yeah,
people tend to let it, then when it happens, then you don't have a choice, right? You just have to do it. But so that I think one of the greatest challenges in the the arguments people make about global warming or climate change is they try to frighten everybody into taking dramatic life-changing action based on fear of what will happen.
right.
And that, but what's not understood is that
Yes,
many people who are looking at the science
yes,
don't agree with the science. And you can say, well, they're wrong and they shouldn't be, but if people don't believe what you're saying, you're not going to get them to go there.
right. There's
So,
there's two shows I recommend. One is the Newsroom. It's on Netflix. It was done 2010, and it was exactly what you were talking about. What's his name? I've gone blank to the guy's name. Jeffrey something. Brilliant. 3 seasons, and it was that kind of transition from telling the news of what it was and then being told what the news should be,
okay,
and the fight against it. Brilliantly written,
okay.
absolutely. And the other one is a show that's on right now, which is Don't Look Up.
Oh,
And
I watched that.
right, so a little parody of, when it's too late, the asteroid's about to hit, they lied, and it's like, how many times do you have to be told? And it is a reflection of where we are right now, I think. And it's like, why don't we look at all of these things as that potential asteroid is coming towards us? I still have that saying in my mind, which I use a great deal: the stitch in time saves nine. Prevention is better than cure.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
I just don't understand why it was common sense. Maybe I'm too old. I don't know. I'm in my 60s, but it was common sense that you did as much prevention or boosting of the immune system or eating right and sleeping right, or knowing that there was a bad winter coming, preparing for it, rather than moaning about it when it comes and you didn't have any preparation. And this is, I think, where we're at today. There's too much saturation of news or knowledge, be it true or not, and people don't know what is true and not. And this is one thing I do like about podcasts. Yes, you've got the sensational podcasts that just want to stir things up, but you've got, and there are some podcasts that are in it for the money because they're getting back.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going into my 10th year. I've still got to earn anything from it. I could barely keep the station
Good
going,
for
so it's
you.
certainly not for the money.
Good for
I
you.
would like to see the money grow a little bit just to keep the
Yeah.
sustainability be a bit stronger. But for me, it's about sharing the wisdom from the
Right.
people
Right.
who are living it, going through it, their opinion, because it's your truth that can resonate with somebody else, or could
Right.
be an illumination for someone else, or even planting a seed of thought. I hadn't thought about it that way. I hadn't seen it that way.
Right.
Or, it's become something I was looking for and I didn't know I was looking for it. And I feel that podcasting now online, using the digital, has become a way of us communicating with each other through various types of storytelling, which is what we're doing in the conversation.
I think you're right. But I think what it also does, and this is, I think, also true, is that you can build a very big audience with your particular form of podcast, but that then becomes one silo of that interest. And then there's someone else can build a very big
Yeah.
audience that's completely contrary to that. So I
And
think
it does go very much of who's sponsoring the podcast.
right, but
Right.
it also can be ideological. I mean,
Yes.
there are,
And we know that sensationalism sells because there's a lot of people that want to buy it.
so for example, there is, you can go if you're, it keeps changing, but there's a there's a lot of podcasts on the web that are very left leaning, and then there are
Mm-hmm.
podcasts on the web that are right leaning, and it's different. they have, each group has their own tribe,
Right,
essentially. They
exactly.
talk about this.
Yeah.
And so it's tricky. I think sometimes I like to watch the Canadian national
Hmm.
news, whatever it is that comes on, and you do national news. And I got fascinated watching there was a whole bunch of stories about one of your ministers who was part Native American who got in
Hmm.
a big fight with the prime minister, and it was just a big. But that's like the news was in the U.S. maybe 50 years ago in some
Hmm.
ways. I mean, I think it's good, but you're having some of the same struggles up there that
Yeah.
we're
Oh
we're
God,
having
yes.
down here. It's
We're
all over the
neighbors.
world.
We have a local news station here in Victoria, which I like watching because there's a lot of kind of barter between,
Mm,
the
mm,
weatherman and the other guy, and they laugh a lot at things and they lighten it up. And when it's serious to tell a story, they're in that serious mode. But you feel that you're getting the information, but you don't feel you're being weighed down by it.
right, right. But I do think that here's another thought, and I tried. Of course, when I was writing my books, you want to, when you write a book or a story, you want the story to run the book, and
Yeah.
it's all about the story. If along the way the story can trigger some speculations or thoughts,
Hmm. Hmm.
great.
Yes.
And I just finished a wonderful book by a guy, his name I think is Alfred Knorr, Knoer, called Cloud Cuckoo Land. And it's one of the most wonderful books I've ever read, and beautifully written story that jumps through time and different characters. But it's really about ancient truth and people striving to find a different place and then finding out that maybe where they were was the best place to be to begin with. This
Right.
kind of idea about you're always searching for more, but you don't even see what's in your backyard. And I think today one of the challenges people have is there's so many people out there who are just struggling to hang on, just desperately struggling. All those noble workers you talk about who
Hmm.
were keeping us going in the pandemic, they don't have a choice. Well,
No,
some of them may, but a lot of them, if they don't put their hours in, they don't get paid, and
exactly. And there's an
and
awful lot of people hand to mouth. It lived from paycheck
yeah, yeah,
to
yeah,
paycheck. Yeah.
yeah. So that's a
I have a
struggle.
book that I think you would enjoy, a gentleman I just interviewed at the end of last year, Jared Knott, and it is um, well, hang on a second, let me get to look at the book, make sure I get the title right. It's Tiny Blunders and Big Disasters. And it's quite fascinating because in it he talks about, and he did 11 years of studying this, and
Yeah,
he little things like one particular war thing, they're not going to shoot yet, they're talking to each other, and one soldier hits his helmet off the wall and somebody thinks it's a gun going off, and the next thing you know, burst
yeah,
out.
yeah,
The Nixon Watergate, it all came about, how they discovered what was going on was piece of sticky tape. And it's little things like this, tiny blunders that ended up being the huge, big disasters. And it's fascinating. But we talked before about my brother, Sam Hawksmoor, and he wrote about the repercussions of Thomas D, of a young boy going through a kind of a wormhole. He's a teenager talking on the phone to his girlfriend, ends up in World War II.
wow,
And with his phone and everything else, gives the information to the wrong person who's a spy for the Nazis. And hence, going forward, Germany won. you know
yeah.
and it's just like the what if factor. What if that hadn't happened? What if this had happened? And I think it not only is fascinating, but I also think it gives us food for thought of perhaps to think about things before we react to things, because we never know, if we're going to change the entire future by reacting too fast.
I agree, and but if you have a, a system of information that depends on crisis to
Mm.
get eyeballs to look at it, and then you said the sense of urgency, and then you try, it's like ready, shoot, aim, it's the
Yes,
it's
yes.
the kind
Trigger
of,
happy. Yeah.
yeah, you try to be deliberative and careful. I still think that most people um, are just trying to do the best they can.
Yeah.
And I think most people, this is maybe naive, but I think most people are trying to do the best they can, and they, obey the rules as best they can, and they do the best they can, and they don't get too excited. They tend not to be visible so much in social media or even on podcasts, and they don't, they're not written about in the news. And,
No.
it's only
The
only,
undercurrent people. They're actually
yeah,
keeping the current going, but nobody sees them. Right.
but they can be aroused too,
Yes.
and
Oh,
they're
yes.
very frustrated or very angry, and it sort of feels now like nobody's really speaking to them. I mean, I think that
On
what,
behalf of them.
yeah, I think what's happened in the last few years has been there's a group of people who are very angry about their lot for whatever reason, and they feel that they've been screwed. And in this country, its jobs went away and a bunch of
Yeah.
other things, and there's been a big movement to authoritarian um, governments around the world in response to that group of people. But I still think there's even bigger group of people who haven't been aroused yet, who don't really want to go where some of these angry people are, but they don't know what to do,
Right.
and there isn't, to date, I don't see anyone speaking so much to them, in a way. And I
But
could be
not in a
wrong.
way that there has been the wrong approach of let's stir them up into anger and injustice.
Right.
But how about speaking to them? What do you need and how can we make it better for you? There hasn't been, let's listen to find a solution. Instead, it was, let's stir them up and start a different type of revolution that wasn't productive.
I don't, what troubles me is I wish, I wish you were right. I'm not sure you are. I think the power of anger and rage and that kind of high emotion is pretty effective, and reasonable consideration and thoughtfulness,
If it's
is,
led properly,
well, even
you know,
there, I
that,
think,
that the thing about, there's a lot of people that they have every right to be angry. They have been completely
right.
overlooked. They have been taken for granted. They have been trodden on. Um, and I think, yes, listen to their anger, tap into that anger, use that energy to address what they need to make it happen. But instead, it ended up becoming not a revolution, but riotous. And if you're in a riot, nobody's going to benefit from that. All you're going to get from that is destruction, more frustration, and more anger. So I can't see how that works. Use the anger to generate energy to find a solution. What other options do we have? Not to the point where you're stirring them up to the pitchforks.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I mean, I'm not saying that riots work, but they get the attention. I mean, even like in this country, for example, there was this big, almost a year ago to the day, there was that big attack,
January
in
6th.
that attack on the Capitol. This is my view. This isn't anybody's view. I'm going to say that 80% of the people who went down to the Capitol were just there, and they were just going along with the flow because everybody went in that direction. And I'd say there were 20% who had much more nefarious goals than mine. They were organized, they planned it in advance, whatever. Okay.
The shoot stirrers, as I call them.
So look what's happened in the years since.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone was horrified when that happened. But then what happened now, it all depends on the narrative. So they're trying to try another narrative. Well, it was just a bunch of hotheads. Well, it wasn't as bad as you think. Those were a bunch of patriots, and it minimizing and it's being done fairly successfully, I think, by some people. So in a way, I mean, I agree with you. If you could find someone to be thoughtful and think things through, but then, sorry,
there's a point that I watched last night, actually, on Trevor Noah on The Daily Show. And it's like Congress has just passed a bill with 13 Republicans, passed it with it, to put stack a lot of money into infrastructure. on all of the cities around America to rebuild
Right, right.
bridges and roads and everything else. And they've been getting death threats.
Hmm.
And there was one guy that did a verbal dialogue, which I can't repeat here, but MF
Yeah,
and kill you and all of that
yeah, yeah.
was going all the way through, you traitor, but his own city is going to benefit from it. And this is the rational thinking. Maybe I'm just off from a different planet, but I can't understand that ignorant anger because your own city is benefiting. Please explain. I don't get it.
Well, first of all, I'll explain it as best I understand it. First of all, you're in Canada, and Canada is. If I could, if Randa and I could move to Canada, retire, we would. I think, but we can't because it's hard to move there. You got to have a job and a whole bunch of other things. It's a different experience. And I was reading a very interesting. My latest passion has been studying the system in Canada of the voyageurs and the coureurs de bois and the fur trade in the 16th and 17th and 18th and 19th century. And it was very interesting overall in the whole Canadian experiences. And you have your own issues with your
Oh,
First
yeah.
Peoples and everything,
Mm.
but in the U.S., in the U.S., there was war with the Indians, with the native tribes, right from the start because the people were coming to America to take land and farm.
Right.
Okay. In Canada, which has only a small amount of really good farmland down in the south,
Mm-hmm.
really, most of it's this huge boreal forest. Canada was developed by this international fur trading
Mm-hmm.
thing, which required partnership with the Indians because they were the ones who showed them the routes and used the canoes and stuff. So that although there's contention between the First Peoples and the Europeans in Canada, the degree, I would argue, is not anything like it was in this country because the history is different.
Until
Well,
recently,
yeah, yeah.
with all the dead bodies of the
Oh, yeah.
children
Oh,
being
yeah.
sent, and then that is raised, and but what has stepped up is apology
Yeah,
and kind of compensation for whatever
yeah,
you can
yeah.
do. There has been that ownership of it, right?
So this is a long way of, I guess, of saying that. So here you have people who are in their silo of belief. Now, there are people who went to Washington on January 6th who firmly believe that the Constitution is being threatened because the election was robbed, the election was stolen, and they are no different than the Minutemen in Concord trying to defend the country against a tyrant. They really believe that in their bones,
Mm-hmm.
and they were astonished and horrified to find that, wait a minute, you mean you police aren't supporting us and what we're doing? So it was the belief was very, very strong. You could argue they were wrong, but they believed it. And
Right.
we're at this point, it seems, where the, your level of belief is what makes something true or not.
Mm.
And on one side, you've got this belief about the election being stolen and all this stuff. And on the other side, you've got a whole another set of beliefs about how the entire country is racist and we have to do all this stuff and wokeness is what that's
Mm-hmm.
called. And they're almost like two sides of the same coin. And
Yeah.
I think what people have lost sight of is that there's probably been in this country, in America, I don't know about Canada, but in America, ever since the beginning in this country, there's been, 10 to 20% of the people just don't fit in. They're
Mm-hmm.
angry, they're radical. It's like
Mm-hmm.
1 in 10, 1 in 5. And they've been kept reasonably controlled by the other 80 to 90%. But every now and then they get power.
Right.
And they're getting some power now. And so you think from Canada, you read this stuff and you think everybody thinks this way. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's true. But they're getting the airtime. And
Right.
that's where the anger equals airtime equals eyeballs equals
Right.
sales.
But then my point going back to before, they're angry. Instead of the killing and the mouthing off and the all the other stuff that they're doing, taking up arms and everything else, Where is the sit down and let's say, let me hear you? Where is the concern? What can we do for you? How can we defuse the situation and serve you? I'm not hearing that. If it is going on, it's certainly not making any of the media. All we are seeing are the rebels, right? And it's almost become the rebel without a cause, because all we're just seeing is the anger all the time. But who is sitting down with them and saying, okay, what can we do about it? And that's I think the missing link. Otherwise, they're just going to keep getting angry and angry and angry and angry until there's a complete combustion. It's somewhere along the line, you've got to address the problem.
Right. Well, there is people look at the country, this is the US now, and they look at what happened in the Civil War and how that war never really ended in some ways. And the very strains that
the war was won, but the battle wasn't.
And the very strains, many people think, well, that was 150 years ago, and so, but it's not. It's still alive. It's a cultural thing, and so I don't know the answer. The even in the Depression, when Franklin Roosevelt was the president, he was able to do a lot of stuff because he had a vast majority of Congress and the House to pass his legislation. But he was accused of being a socialist and all this stuff, and he made a lot of changes because he could, because it was the Depression and then the war, and but that was a crisis everybody understood.
Right.
Now you have a situation where, on the one hand, you have Biden saying the economy is doing better than it's done in years. On the other hand, you've got all this press saying that COVID's bankrupting the economy.
Right, exactly.
You don't know who to believe.
Yeah, and probably both are true.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So I don't...
It's just whom is benefiting.
Well, of course, my pure little selfish interest is if people need escape, so maybe they'll read my books.
Right, exactly. Let's talk about your books and lighten up the subject a bit. As I said, I've been reading, and I'm sorry that I didn't get to read it all the way through, but I have been reading Adrift. And you were at sea for a long time. So did this actually happen to you, or are you writing from somebody else it's happening to, or?
No. Well, no. I've spent time at sea. I don't know. I fished commercially for a few years, and then I went back when I was 65, and I went back for 4 more years as a merchant sailor on big commercial and military ships. And I've never been on a ship that caught fire, which is what happens in a drift. I've never had to abandon ship into a lifeboat, although I've been in lifeboats and done lifeboat drills, right? I've been in some pretty bad weather. I've had my experience in pretty bad weather. So the book Adrift is as true as I could make it based on what I know from my sea experience, but it's not based on anything real that happened. And in fact, I don't know if you got far enough into the book, but at one these people who run this old beat up salvage tug go racing up to try to grab the ship. And when the ship's drifting and there's no power on the ship, how do you get aboard the ship? And then how do you attach a line to the ship to tow it? And I didn't know how to do it. And so what I did was I was on LinkedIn, and I have all these guys in the maritime industry, tugboat captains and stuff, whom I stay in touch with on LinkedIn. So I just did a broadcast message that's saying, look, if a ship's dead in the water and it doesn't have any winches or power, how do you hook a tow up on a tugboat? And these guys all wrote back and told me how to do it. So that's what's in the story. I mean,
right, wonderful. So it is somebody else's experience that you've attached to the story, right?
Yeah, and you can't, if you can't, I've had a lot of people have read Adrift and really enjoyed it and really felt that they were there when
I'm definitely into it. I just haven't had time to finish it, but most certainly, getting a little seasick with them in the boat right now.
And so the whole point is, at least I would argue in fiction, the whole point is to draw the reader such that the reader is there in the
Mhm.
story, seeing it happen as it's happening. And that's hard to do, but it's much easier to do, I think, if if I've had the enough experience around something,
Mhm.
then I can picture it, and then I'm just writing what I see.
But it's also about character building. Now, my brother is an author as well. And, when he's doing something that happens to include, historical things, he will go to that place and study as much as he
Mhm,
can.
mhm, mhm,
And he will incorporate that historical event into his book. But it
mhm,
is about the characters going through the historical event,
mhm,
right? So what you've done is that you've taken characters and their various reactions to what's going on, using something that could or could not have happened, which has probably most certainly happened. Ships do catch fire, whether you've
mhm,
been on one or not. And it's really about, I mean, this is why I'm drawn to things like The Walking Dead. It's not about the zombies. It's about how do people react in this time period, where because there is no more security, there is no more comfort, there is no more who, doesn't matter who you are or your title. Everybody's in it together, and what are they going to do to survive? So it's exciting and it's intriguing as to what it brings out in people, because we always want to identify with someone. What would I do if I was in that
mhm,
situation?
mhm.
Could I do that? Oh, that was pretty clever. And I think that's where we immerse ourselves into the story. And I am immersed into it. I just haven't had time to finish it. So I love the way, where it's going and who's the strength and who isn't. And that you've got to know about characters, people to make a story. It doesn't matter whether what's factual or not factual. It's, do you buy the characters? And
Mhm.
so where do you get your characters from? Is this just from a lifelong of watching people?
That's a really good question. I originally, the first couple of novels that I wrote, it was a struggle to create the characters. I mean, I would have a character, and but I wouldn't sit down and plot a character's life or write
Mm,
all this stuff about it or any of that stuff. I just write it, which is lazy maybe, but I would do it that way. And originally, the first few books I wrote, the book really didn't become real to me until enough characters were, at least there were at least two characters were kind of walking on their own, and then the story started to
mhm,
happen. But in this series, what's happened is very, very different because I did so many years of research
mhm,
and I hadn't been writing for a long time. The characters, almost without exception, just
mhm.
appeared,
Yeah.
and they were fully formed and they appeared. And I don't know how that happened. And I mean, one thing though, Sarah, which is really important, is if you know the structure of that story, it's got a different kind of structure in that the linear timeline of the ship burning and going adrift and being taken, and it's told from several points of view from different
Mhm.
characters located in different places, like different little plot lines, and each chapter is from a different point of view. But the reader, know that I'm not going to go back into a backstory or flip back
Mhm.
to the, it's linear. So each character is part of a bigger story, but it was important. I recognize this way a long time ago, that each character needs to have their own arc of challenge and development, or you, the reader, won't be interested in
Right.
him or her. So, for example, one character is this ex-reporter named Travis who goes on a tug, and he's his mother's ill, and he's worried about his mother, and he's trying to earn money to help care for her support. And he was working in a newspaper and didn't like it, and he goes on this tug. But his issue is, what do I do about my mother who's getting
Mm,
dementia?
mhm.
And then the captain, Steve, he's the captain of the ship, but his issue is he has a disabled son and he has to sail to pay for the
Yeah.
home care of the disabled son. And so his fear is, what do I do when if I can't afford to keep my son? And so well, it's all one story.
Yeah.
Each character who's telling the story, I can't just have a character to move the story along, or you,
Right.
reader, will lose interest.
Mhm.
But hopefully, you're engaged enough so that each time it comes to a new character, you think, oh yeah, that's right. You know, there's Pete, who's, you know, the guard down at the shack. You know, what's going on with him? And and if it doesn't work, I lose you. But if it works, then essentially you fall into a story where there's not just a lead character, but there are
Yeah,
a whole community of people
a
who are in
chorus
the
of them.
story.
Mm.
And it seems to work, and it's fun to do it that way, and the readers seem to like it.
Yeah, but I mean, because you've got the couple that, she wants to leave her husband, I mean,
Right. She's done
but
with them.
she's done with him. But, like they're going to go out, with that tug and get that ship because there's money to be made in
Yeah.
that, and they're going to sink or swim, otherwise, it's like put up with him one more time, right? And
Yeah.
and then you've got the people actually on the ship that have had to jump and get, and they don't know if the other lifeboat is, if they've got them or not. And it's, you're leaving people on the edge, but at the same time you're investing in the characters, and you become worried about them. Are they going to make
Right.
it? Is this going to change their life? What about this? What about that? And some people read for escapism, some people read for connection, some people read to be transported in. And I like a book that leaves me kind of questioning, what would I do? Or do I know someone like that? Or I wonder what when my brother writes a sequel, I love it because
Mm.
I know I'm already invested in the character.
Mm.
And what's the character going to do now? Who's going to come into their life and turn it upside down now? And I, as a reader, love that, because you don't want a one-dimensional. You want all
Right.
these different, because it is the chorus, right? It is the
Right.
entire orchestra. Otherwise, it's just one violin all the time, and it can be rather dull. So tell us about Totem, because that's your latest book.
Well, Totem is the third and final book in this series of books. They're really standalone stories, but it makes sense to read them in order. You don't
Mm,
have to. Many people don't. You can read
mhm,
Adrift and then go back and read Strongheart. If you're into Adrift at all, you know that Williams and his crew have ended up stuck on this place, right? And they're stuck in this place, and they get William to tell them a story to pass the time. Well, the story William tells is the first book, Strongheart. I mean, you'll
right.
figure that out, and so you can go back and read that. And then Totem is the following spring and summer, back in the park, where a lot of the same characters go back into the park, and the mining companies trying to go in there and start doing their work, and these strange animals appear, these mysterious elk kills that they don't know quite what's going on. I've got this embittered wildlife biologist who's lost his career over someone accusing him of falsifying data. He's trying to figure this out, and he's damned if he's going to say anything until he really knows,
Right.
And he's got this ornery niece who gets beaten up by her boyfriend, who comes and lives with him, and he takes her along because he can't do anything else with her, and she's got a different idea, and so
Mhm.
just again, it's a bunch of different characters who all, for different reasons, end up in this place called Bear Valley in the park at the same time, and there's a great kind of conflagration of events, and then the rest of the book goes on from there in terms of this commitment that's made about finding this place somewhere else in the park that might give an answer to everything. And so
Mhm.
that's what it is. It's again, it's
A
a
journey.
story, it's a journey,
Mm,
and it's a story with some of the same characters. And what you don't have in Adrift, but you do have in Strongheart, and then you really have in Totem, is in the other books, there's also stories of a dream or a vision or an actual transfer in time that a character makes and talks about. And you, the reader, decide whether
mm,
it's a dream or a memory, or really they really went there. And you can read it either way. And so again, it's just stories layered on stories. And of course, the ultimate question for Sarah, who's really the main character in all this, although she's not very much in Adrift, is where is her home, and
mm.
what is the meaning of all this, and how did we get here? And so that's what it is. The Totem as long as two of the other books. I mean, it's a long book, pretty complicated book, but people really seem to like it, and that's the point.
Right. I mean, the dedication and the discipline to sitting down and writing a book. As you said, there's some people who have already got the story in their head, they've got the format, they know which each chapter is going to be. And there are some people who've got several characters and they don't know how they're going to play together until they start writing, and the characters take over,
Hmm.
and they write themselves, so to speak. Are you that kind of writer?
More of that. I
Mm.
had a general idea when I started this series. It wasn't going to be a series, it was just
Mhm.
going to be one book. And I had a general idea that I wanted to do something about the Olympic Peninsula and the Pacific Northwest. I wanted to do something about this ancient legend that Native Americans have, that people have always been here in North America. And I wanted to do something about coming of age and an ornery young kid finding their power in an impossible way. And I ended up choosing a young girl rather than a young boy for a lot of reasons. And that was the beginning of it. I did 3 years of research before I started writing anything, but I didn't outline anything, or I
Mm.
just had notes on
Right. Just to keep
geology,
keep
Carl Jung. I
keep you
mean,
channeled right. Yeah.
all that
Mm.
stuff. And so then I just started, and I when I wrote the first book, the first draft of the first book, Sarah, there was the frame of that book was different. It was the frame that Joseph Conrad used in Heart of Darkness, which was a bunch of men go out and go to a pilot boat, and they wait for the tide to turn so they can go out to meet the ship. And while they're waiting for the tide to turn, this guy tells the story about Kurtz and the Heart of Darkness. So my frame was William's lifeboat crashes ashore on Haida Gwaii, and they're going crazy, and the mate says, "Tell us a story, William." And
Mm.
William tells the story that's the story of Strongheart the previous summer.
Right.
But then what I did, because that was a long book, I stripped away the frame and just told the story of
Right.
Strongheart. But
Right.
then I had all these chapters with William and the lifeboat, and I
Right.
thought, well, what about the ship? And so that became a drift. And then the
Right.
third book, which at one point I didn't know I was going to write one more book or five more books, right? And I thought,
Mm.
don't get trapped. And so I wrote one book called Found, which was about going back in the park. And then I wrote another book to complete it. And then I put them together and made them one big book. And in all these cases, um, and I had the first draft of all these books written by 2015, but it took me until 2017 till now to get them out, because
Mm.
each book took 3 years of revising and
Yeah.
stripping away and rewriting and adjusting, to the point where I was comfortable with it, and it's the best I can do. And so that's. But to answer your question, no, I don't do outlines. It's like writing a
Mm.
book twice. I
Yes.
have I Yeah, it's initially a complete exercise in faith as you start doing this.
Mm.
You don't know if it's going to work, but unless you get off your own shoulder,
Right.
stop monitoring yourself, you can't do it. And
Yeah.
I want to do another series, but I have to tell you honestly, the promotion side of this is
Yes.
so exhausting and difficult and frustrating and humiliating and expensive
Yeah.
that it's hard to keep your heart for that part of it.
Right. I know my brother's a professional author, and believe me, any of that other side of
Yeah,
it is dreadful on. Yes. Which is a shame because, the books are so exciting, and it's like when people read them, they really love them.
yeah.
But how do you get them out there? Because a regular publisher used to go and do book signings and this and that. And now even a publisher would say, well, you're on your own, go and do your own advertising. And so
Well,
it's
even if
totally changed now.
well, unless if you're really established, and I know some authors who are, and they have a good active publisher, they're good because they've
Hmm.
got a base of a few thousand people who buy their book.
Right.
But that's a function of persistence and luck. It's
Yeah.
a big part of it. But the problem today is is just being noticed.
Yes.
How do you? It was 70,000 books a year being produced.
Right.
How do you even be noticed?
Right.
And so um, luck plays a huge role in this, just chance and luck. In the end, you do what you can, and you have to live with
And
it.
I'm afraid to say it, social media,
Yeah,
podcasts and social media is
yeah,
that you have to put it out there. And,
yeah,
so, this is one of the reasons I have the Author's Kiss
yeah,
channel
yeah,
here,
yeah,
is to put
yeah.
it out there for authors, because I think, books are, oh, I like TV shows and movies and think, but there's something about a book,
Mhm.
because you pick a character in there that that feels like you, and you become that character. And it's a wonderful journey to take, and you really kind of feel an attachment to it, which you don't always feel in a TV show or a movie unless it's
Right,
extremely well done.
right,
But in a book, you do.
right.
You're far more immersed in it. And I hope that, and for a while they were saying, oh, books aren't going to be read anymore, and then it was like a rebellion against it. And of course, Harry Potter changed reading for kids considerably.
Right.
And people are realizing that there's a wonderful sense of tranquility and peace in diving into a good book.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Oh yeah.
And that it's, although you're reading the script of the book, it's your interpretation of it, it's your participation of what you're going to get out of it, which I think is really exciting.
Well, I think again, the base overall thesis in what I did in my series was that it's just telling of stories that made
Mm,
us modern humans. And so I tried to tell some stories just the way we used to do it, I
right.
mean, literally around a campfire in some cases. And that's how we imparted knowledge and imparted
Yes.
culture. And it
Yes.
still is.
Yes.
It still is. And I mean, today we can talk about the narrative, whoever comes up with the ruling narrative wins. Well, that's
Mm,
just the most powerful story,
yeah, it is.
and so
Yeah.
it's that hasn't changed,
No. No.
and so it's a long, long tradition. It goes back forever. And I think we're all of us storytellers. It's just some of us want to have others read more than others. It's as simple as that.
I think, from my brother is a writer, and he transposes into a different person in a different world when he writes completely. Um, I've had people nagging at me for a long time for my book, and it's like it's the hardest thing to write, because people want me to write about myself, and it's like I just don't know how to do this, because, and so I've brushed it around, and I kind of came up with the thing of, it's my angel's perspective of being my guardian. And I think it might be a way of me being able to share it from the angel's point of view of, oh,
Right,
you've she's done it again, you know, where I can lighten up over the stories, or I can share the stories from her view rather than my view.
right.
Because there's something about writing about your own life. I'm very open and honest about things that have happened to me in my life, but I'm one of these people, it's been and done, I move on. But people want to know my story, and it's like, I suppose I've procrastinated because I was born, this happened. It's not the kind of the way I want to do it. So I think it might be the angel's perspective that's going to come up, because it might make it a bit easier.
Yeah, it's true.
So
It's
I think,
true.
writing fiction, which I call faction, when you can read a fiction and it feels more like fact than fiction, that this really could happen, or you really feel it's happening, then you know that somewhere along the line, however far out it might be, it must have happened, right?
Well, I guess you could argue that if you can, I mean, Carl Jung would probably argue that if you can write fiction that in some ways connects with different archetypes that
Mm-hmm.
we're born with, that will resonate with you and draw you in.
Mm-hmm.
And you could say it are ancient truths or um, ancient emotional truths. People look for emotional
Mm-hmm.
truths, but when I talk about ancient wisdom, to me, I don't think there's anything new. There's any new wisdom from like 100,000 years ago. There's lots of new tools,
Perspectives of it.
perspectives, but
Mm.
it's still about, are you true to yourself? Can you
Yes.
face yourself at the end? Those sorts of things.
Yes.
And so um, those don't change. And I think the conceit we fall into is that, well, we're different now. Things are different now. We've changed things. You know, it's a different world, and that's when you get in trouble.
You know, we can't fight against advancement. I have a 9-month-old
No.
grandson. My daughter keeps him away from, TV and this and that, but he FaceTimes me and he knows
Yeah.
who I am the moment he
Yeah.
sees my
Yeah.
face, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I do think later on there's going to be the old chip in the head. I think it's there, and we can't fight against technology. What we've got to do is work with it, but
Right.
don't lose our core selves, our
Right.
core beingness. And I think that's the challenge where we're at right now. I have a show coming up in the next few weeks on millennials and, have we dumbed them down by the apparatus, where all they can do is talk to themselves through TikTok and text and this and that, and they don't know how to communicate anymore. And we have a certain thing of youth that really do not know how to do their own investigation or tap into themselves or understand what that inner wisdom is, because they've abbreviated everything is an abbreviation and 10-second stimulation,
Yeah.
that they don't know how to go deep or how to ask the questions or how to investigate. And that's where the dangers are. We can't switch technology off. And this is something that always fascinates me. Every movie or TV show you see about Armageddon and the world coming to an end, all technology goes completely. Yet for some reason, we can't start it up again. We can't power up the electricity again. We can't seem to run the water again. It's like we've become completely Neanderthals and unable to do anything. And that just seems unrealistic to me, because I think if everything goes down, we'll find a way to put it back up.
Well, I think I would agree with you. Well, in certain places, many places,
Yeah, maybe not the entire world, but
but
certainly, yeah.
big integrated complex systems may break apart for a while.
Yeah.
But they Buckminster Fuller, I remember, I think he used to talk about years and years ago about appropriate technology. Why use a nuclear power plant to boil water?
Mm-hmm.
You can use appropriate technology,
Yes.
but I look at all this and it's just a very complicated world we live in. I do think that we've built these complicated, interdependent,
Mm-hmm.
complex systems that don't have a lot of reserve in them.
Mm-hmm.
And we're now being shocked as things don't seem to work very well.
Right.
And once you break Humpty Dumpty, it's hard to put them back.
Right.
And it
You're
may
going to
be,
see the cracks.
and it may be that the archaeological record shows that almost every civilization lasted about 250 years, and then it went down
Right.
8 or 9 generations, and maybe that's going to happen again.
Right.
I just don't know.
And when you look at our generation, we've had the privilege of growing up playing in the dirt, playing outside. Like TV was black and white and only on for a few hours, and you listen to the radio and dial-up phone and all of that. And we've gone through this massive technology surge to where it is today. And we can see the benefits. We can't be doing this right now without technology. But we also remember the beautiful connection and the simplicity of just being out amongst nature, in the forest or in the water or just playing in the dirt. I used to make mud pie dinners, We've forgotten how to do that.
It may be though, Sarah, that children today will have a similar memory when they're our age.
Yeah.
It's just a different memory.
Right.
And it might just be that, I don't really know. I look at the way my son's raising his 2 kids, my grandkids were 6 and 3, and they try to limit they know TV and shows, but they're outdoors all the time and pretty basic. And I don't know. I
think we have to incorporate both sides. My little 9-month-old grandson, they take him out for walks in the woods, and they live more in a rural area, and they're completely vegan, and they're activists and, all of that. So they have that side of the world, but they understand there's this side of the world as well. And I think the big world, the big word is balance, right? Balance.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what I try to do in my stories, actually, in some ways, is just try to find a way to muddle through,
Right.
and have balance. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
I mean, that's the, like the
Let's see
ship
what.
was out of balance, it's going to sink. The lifeboat topsy-turvy, you got out of balance. So, really comes down to it is that if you feel that you're getting a pull too much to one side, we need that equilibrium. We
Right,
really do need that equilibrium. And that comes very much from the inner wisdom, not the
right,
outer. The outer knowledge could be the one that can sink you sometimes, because if it always is, yes, but why? Yeah, but why? But when you go into the inner side, then you know. I don't
right,
need to understand why, because I feel the why. I
right, right,
understand the why. And I think a lot of this invitation that's going on right now is go into your center core, be attached to that center core, and then you'll actually understand how to use the
right,
outside in a more balanced fashion.
right. Well, that's not, honestly, that's not at all different from when you're trying to write fiction.
Mm,
You do the same thing. You go inside somewhere
yeah.
and this thing appears, and your job is to get it out there somewhere. So yeah.
So I want people to go back and listen to our first show as well, where we also talk about the books, but we've just, we just have this
Yep.
wonderful conversation about many things. So people, all they have to do, Self-Discovery Media, and put in your name, Charles Sheldon, and show will come up. Plus both shows will come up. And also all of your books will come up. But how do people get hold of the books, love? Where can they buy them? And how can they get hold of you?
Okay, they can get hold of me by with my email address, charliesheldon2.com. I mean, no, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
My
Charlie
email
Sheldon
at
2 at
2 at
gmail.com.
gmail.com, at
Yes.
gmail.com. And it's Charlie with an IE. And if they do get a hold of me by email, I will send them a free copy of the first book in the series, Strongheart, which they can put up on their Kindle and read.
Wonderful.
Okay, so that's the freebie. I'll give away Strongheart to anybody who emails me.
Excellent.
Okay,
That's wonderful.
charliesheldon2 at gmail.com. And
And
the books can be, you can go to a bookstore, and the bookstores can order the books if they're not in the bookstore. They probably, maybe in the Pacific Northwest, there'll be books there, but in the rest of the country, probably not, but they're on order. They can be ordered from Ingram. They can get the books on Amazon, of course. They're on Amazon. There's also a ebook or Kindle book on Amazon. And Strongheart, the first book in my series, is also an audiobook on Amazon. My webpage is charliesheldon2.com. And there you can also get links to buy the books through an independent bookstore and a bunch of other stuff I've written about that they might find fun or interesting. And again, if they want a free copy of Strongheart, the first copy in the series, if they've listened to this point and still with us, then just email me at charliesheldon2.com. Say you
no,
listened.
Charlie Sheldon 2 at
I'm
gmail.com.
sorry, you're right. charliesheldon2 at gmail.com. And, you're writing from Self-Discovery podcast or from Sarah's podcast, and I'll send you a copy of Strongheart.
Wonderful. And of course, you're on Facebook, Charlie Sheldon 2. So it's very simple. It's
Yeah,
charliesheldon2.com, Charlie Sheldon 2 at
yeah,
gmail.com, and Facebook, Charlie Sheldon 2.
yep. Oh, yep, absolutely. And I hope I can hear from some people.
Yes, we'd love to hear some response. What part of the conversation did you connect to? Do you have any questions about the books? Do you have any questions about writing? Do you have any philosophies that you want to
Right.
share, right? Because that's something else that I think that we've forgotten to do. We are reactionary people, but we're not interaction. And I think, interact with each other. You don't understand a situation until you ask the questions and you're open to see things from the other side. And I would like to see more of that going on instead of just a reaction.
One more thing, Sarah, that a group called the Online Book Club for Readers, which is on the web and has almost 3 million members around the world now. My book Totem will be book of the month on the online book club on February 1st for the month of February. And I'm setting up a special for the Totem ebook purchase that it's usually $8.99 for the Kindle version of Totem, but I'm going to offer it for $1.99 for a few days starting on February 1st through Amazon. So that's kind of a big launch, second big launch for Totem, an online book club. So that's another option.
Is it onlinebookclub.com?
I think so, yeah. The guy
Okay.
named Scott Hughes runs it. And he, when I started working with him, he had 150,000 members. Now he has almost 3 million.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Excellent.
He knows
A good way of getting things out,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Definitely. Right. And, that's the thing. I'm always saying to people, people have book clubs. It's great to all read a book and then come back and each share your own perspectives of it. But I also say have podcast clubs. You listen to a podcast, come back and have a conversation, because each person who listens to these shows is going to get something else out of it. And then come back and have a discussion. Wow, talk to each other, share your perspectives. No wrong way or right way. It's just your way, right? Always a delight to have you here, Charlie. Really do enjoy our time here together. Thank you for coming back and sharing with us.
Thank you, Sarah. I enjoyed it, and hope I hear from some of your listeners, and have a great 2022.
You too, my love. You too. Remember, folks, the books are really, really engaging, and there's a thread between each one of them. Each one of them stands alone, but when you read all three of the books, you're going to see that wonderful weave. So please go and pick up the books. We're still in winter. Put your feet up by the fireplace and just sit back and read a book and be transported. And then afterwards, food for thought. What did it do for you? Where did it take you? What does it reflect upon you? Because that's the beauty of a really good book. So until next time, folks, bye for now. We hope that you enjoyed the show right here on selfdiscoverymedia.com. Please tune in to our selfdiscoverymedia.com/shows, and you will see all the other genres that we have from you. Every week on Tuesday, we bring you new shows from illuminating people. If you know someone that should be interviewed, please contact us at info@selfdiscoverymedia.com. Now stay tuned for your next show.